Hi everybody, this is Cynthia. Today we're going to take a look at the koshas, or the layers of the body. So we'll start today just by going through a little guided meditation on the first topic that we're covering. And in this guided meditation that we will begin with, we will explore the different layers of the self according to the yoga system of the koshas. So go ahead and bring your spine upright. Find your natural seat, your two sitting bones left and right, your tailbone in the back, your pubic bone in the front, and then close your eyes. And become aware of your physical body, kind of the bricks and mortar. And this would be the layer of ourself that we need food to survive, the food layer, so to speak. And it's the physical body that returns back and recycles into the earth as food. In the yoga system, this outermost shell of our form is referred to as the food layer. We'll look at it a little more intensely, but just maybe even place your hands on this amazing body and just feel around your face, your arms, your legs. The amazing preciousness of this form, which is always looking for balance, always looking for homeostasis, right? Creating balance in the internal systems that regulate the life of your physical body. And then as you become aware of your body, you start to become aware of that life force and that breath that creates a rhythm that gives life to the body. We've spoken a lot about prana, and this is that layer of the self that is the prana, the life force, the breath, the tidal rhythm of the form. Give yourself a few breaths just to feel into that form. Feel how it moves the physical body outside of it. Feel how the body and the breath intertwine and become one rhythmic, interconnected, interwoven sense. And become a little bit curious of what might be deeper still from that life force, from that energetic body. In the model that we are looking at today, this would be the layer of your mind. The layer of your mind. It has its own kind of rhythm, which is separate from that life force and separate from that body, but again, interwoven outward. Filling those two outer layers with its own sense of importance. Every thought that comes tells you how important it is. It asks you to pay attention to it totally. Even if it's a small little thought, it likes to claim itself. Become aware of all three of those working together. The mind, feeling outward into the energetic layer. The energetic layer and the mind feeding out into the physical body. And then retracing back inward, back to the mind. Maybe drop for a moment, just a layer deeper, and see what might be under the mind. In this model, that layer deeper is your intuitive body. That intelligence that is born deeper than the mind. That which links us to our inner knowing, our inner purpose, the mystery of information that arises. That intuitive self that actually, when you sit in it, doesn't it feed the mind? Doesn't it support the mind? Doesn't it also inform the prana, the life force? And doesn't it also resonate in the physical form? Doesn't it fill back outward? And then, even quieter, we'll go to this deepest layer for just a moment. And we'll linger there in a little bit of silence, but just to set the foundation of it. It is sometimes referred to as the bliss layer or the universal layer. But that layer of deep, deep pre-intuition, universal self, the heart. Feel how that deep consciousness cannot be harmed, is not subject to creation, destruction, but can only really remember itself. Can you feel how that fills outward into the intuition as its mysterious source, into the mind, into the energetic body, and even if you get quiet, into the physical body? Let's just spend about a minute feeling into that deep heart of consciousness. Feel a rhythm that's always moving. The dynamic interplay of all these 5 layers. And take a full breath in. Open your mouth, let it out. And gently opening your eyes. Welcome yourself in. And we'll talk now about these layers of the self. So the koshas are the 5 layers of the self. And something that's really fun to note about the koshas, when you look at the different words for the 5 layers, and I'll just give you what they are. They are Annamaya kosha, they are Pranamaya kosha, Manomaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, and then deepest is Anandamaya kosha. Okay. What you hear, it sounds like they all rhyme, but what you're really hearing is the word Maya, right? So you can see that what's continuous, you have the core word, say Ana, and then Maya. So for the outer layer, for example, Ana means food. So that would be your food layer, your outer layer, Ana Maya, Maya, and then Kosha, it means layer. Okay, so what is the significance of this word Maya? We've talked about Maya before. Maya is the great goddess of illusion, and she is the play of life that might sometimes be called the ego, might sometimes just simply be referred to as illusion. Okay. What's really fun is when you look at the words here for the layers of the self, is that written plainly, written straight for us to see, no questions about it, every layer of the self, even that deepest Anandamaya Kosha, that deepest bliss layer, they contain the word Maya, which indicates that every single layer of the self is an illusion, even the bliss self, even the conscious self, okay? That's not to say that you should get rid of the layers. You can't. You have a form. It's just to say, hey, remember what we're working with here is actually the illusion body. Because yoga is reminding us again and again of our connection to the inner self or the inner divine. And so this word Maya is actually really important because it's indicating to us and it's reminding us straight away that every layer of the self, including that deepest core of the heart, is not exactly who we are. It's still Maya because there's movement there, because there's a dance there. There's something that we can pay attention to. Okay. The history of the koshas reminds us that the theory of the body layers goes very deep. It goes all the way into the Upanishads from about 400 or 500 BC. And it's actually a very short little passage in those Upanishads, as a lot of texts have it. You know, sometimes there's a couple of things that will come out, and then that's what gets developed into bigger theories. And it's like that. So in one of these Upanishads, the Taittiriya Upanishads, you can see it says, now a man here is formed from the essence of food. Here is his head, this is his right side, this is his left side, this is his torso, and this is his bottom on which he rests. And we did this in the meditation. But here we have the human being and the Annamaya Kosha, or the physical body. You know, it's that which needs food. It's that which is connected to the elements. You have space and air, you have water and fire and earth. And so that's the physical form that in the Western world, we seem extremely preoccupied with, actually, is just the physical form. And even when we talk about the subtle form or the pranic layer or these deeper layers, we seem to really enjoy talking about that stuff within the context of the physical body. But it's the obvious choice because we have a physical body, so we might as well use it as our anchor, right? Different from that, and lying within this man, formed from the essence of food, is the self consisting of life breath, which suffuses that man completely. This is something we're going to see as we progress into these. Every layer feeds the layer above it, so to speak, outward from it. So what you can hear here is different from and lying beneath, within this man formed of food, is the self consisting of life breath, prana, which suffuses outward the physical form completely. Okay. And then you have, of this self, the out breath, which is prana, is the head. And this is where we start to get into the prana vayus, actually. The interbreath vyana is the right side. The in-breath apana, we talk about apana as moving energy downward. So that's what roots us. That's the left side. The space element is the torso and the core. And the earth element is the bottom on which it rests. So this is just kind of mystical language to tell you how prana is moving in the second layer, okay? You don't need to think too much about those details, just to know that the second layer in is prana moving throughout the form and then infusing outward into the physical body. You have all of your chakras in the pranic layer. You have the movement of prana within the pranic layer. So if you have explored those prana vayus, if you have explored the nadis, Sushumna, Ida, Pingala, Nadi, and the way that energy moves through the subtle body and the winds of the body, as well as these chakras, these kind of station points of energy, that's the pranamaya kosha layer. Different from and lying within this self consisting of breath is the self consisting of mind, which suffuses this other self completely. Of this self, the head is the Yajus mantra as we start to go into the mantras, right? So the mind is representing kind of our cognitive ability and then also our practice. So the mantras are kind of in here. You get all these different mantras that are representing the functions of the mind, feeding back outward. And this seems kind of interesting, right? Because in this yogic model that comes out of the Upanishads, it's a little bit different than some later models, which are really wonderful models that came out of Tantra and Kashmiri Shaivism, where mind, so we've discussed what mind means, and we need to do a little bit of review here, because manas, or mind, is not the same as chitta, which is the word that we usually use to describe mind. Chitta is thought form plus emotion form, thought emotion, right? We've talked a lot about how thought and emotion are linked and inseparable. But Manomaya Kosha is a little bit more specific, isn't it? It's really talking about the superconscious mind, which relates to the brain waves, the delta brain waves, for example. You have the deep subconscious mind, which relates to the theta brain waves. You have the subconscious mind, which are the alpha waves. And then you have conscious mind, which is the beta waves, right? So here you have kind of more of a scientific look at mind, as opposed to this more comprehensive vision of what mind is in the yoga world. So it's not chitta, it's manomaya kosha, which is quite literally like the brain waves kosha, okay? And then you have, different from and lying within this self of the mind, is the self consisting of perception and wisdom, or intuition, which is the vijnana, which suffuses this other self completely. You have faith, you have truth, you have yoga, celebration, you have all of these different aspects of the intuitive self that are kind of delineated. And then those two infuse outward. Some would call the Vijnana Maya Kosha the direct connection into the astral body, or the direct connection into the soul. It has to do with siddhis, or yogic abilities and powers. For example, coming up with solutions, or healing, or materializing. Intuition is really at the core of all of this. So the Vijnana Maya Kosha is very interesting, and it's something that we don't spend a whole lot of time, especially in the West, looking at, right? We don't really honor this layer, for example, as important certainly as the physical body. You know, if you say that you're working on your intuitive self, most people, if they even know what you mean by that, would be like, yeah, okay, you know, we don't tend to put, except in certain circles, but we don't tend to put as much time and effort and focus on this layer. But in this system, we really do, because it's underneath and supporting those outer layers. And in order to get there, you have to get a little bit quieter, right? You have to get a little bit more internal in your practice to get into this inner layer. And then you have different from and lying within this self, consisting of perception, is the self consisting of bliss. And you know, bliss is a tricky word in the yoga world. It's not like psyched out, happy, you know, kind of bliss. It's more closely related to that subtle santosha state, which is deep contentment, right? And it's related to the heart. So words used here are pleasure, delight, thrill, bliss, and Brahman. And Brahman represents that inner divine, your creativity, and it really is, it's Ananda, right? Ananda is bliss. So Anandamaya Kosha is that which brings us great joy. And the deepest forms of great joy as related to this layer have to do with co-creation, peak experiences, including spiritual experiences, creative experience, sexual experiences. So, but really that tapping of joy at the core of the heart that's available, which is a direct line to the divine on the inside. Not quite the same thing, because the divine is actually qualityless, entirely qualityless, but certainly that which is born from it. Okay? You're resting on Brahman. But essentially what you can see in this Upanishad passage is that there are qualities within each of these layers. And that's why this is considered Maya, right? Because there's a lot of qualities here. And then each one of those layers fills the layer outside of it, of the self. We have done a lot of conversation, just to backtrack for a moment, because this is worth exploring. That second layer in, or the pranic layer, or the pranamaya kosha, is kind of the catch basin for a lot of the subtle body. And when I say a lot of the subtle body, I mean like most of the subtle body. That includes nadis, that includes chakras, that includes prana and pranavayus. So much that we look at when we look at the subtle body is that second layer, okay? Of course, it's fed by the lower layers, including and especially probably by Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is the intuitive layer, right? But we shouldn't get too confused by the other layers, because that pranic layer really is the holding place for almost all subtle body exploration that we do, right? Yeah, we have all of it in there. And then we get in there, and by the way, all of the study that we do on the subtle body, for example, when we look into the nadis and the pranavayus and all of the ways that energy moves within the body, we spend a lot of time looking at that, at the pranamaya kosha, right? You could spend just as much time looking at, peeling away, exploring each one of these layers, right? So just because we spend a lot of time looking at pranamaya kosha doesn't mean there's not a whole lot to explore in Anandamaya kosha. There sure is. And there is in Vijnanamaya kosha, and there is in Manomaya kosha. But yoga definitely has a very strong connection to this pranamaya kosha and these teachings of subtle body. This has nothing to do with transcending. This is the body that you're born with, live with, and die with. So you don't transcend your koshas. Your koshas are the costume that you're wearing, so to speak, as a human, right? And the point isn't to transcend the koshas, it's to become aware of them. And then especially to become aware of how they are operating within you and where there might be dysfunction, for example, in the koshas, or where we might store trauma. For example, we might store trauma in the pranamaya kosha, or we might store trauma in the annamaya kosha, in the physical body, or it might be down low in that discernment, in that intuition layer of vijnanamaya kosha. So when we're looking at the things that are inhibiting us from understanding ourselves, we can use this as a map. But unless you, even if you are fully enlightened and you fully wake up into a non-dual space of like divine within meets divine without, well, I mean, unless you die in that second of realization, you still have to come back to your body, don't you? So you still have these 5 layers that are this character suit that you're working with. So it's not so much about transcendence in the way that, samadhi is a different map. Samadhi is following, it is a transcendence model where you're trying to deepen into your immanent self, right? The divine self. But that process actually is part and infused through the koshas. And you have to do it on all the layers of the koshas. You can't just like wake up in your mind, for example. You have to wake up in your mind and in your heart and in your intuitive body and in your, right? And then what are you left with after that? Well, you're left still inhabiting those. So then you live and interact with the dance. And then the dance and the dancer kind of merge. And that's where some of the paradox starts to come in, where it's not so much transcendence, right? It's more like, I am this body. And then you can also equally say, and I'm also not this body. I am this mind, and I also am not this mind. I am this breath, and I also am not this breath. If that's confusing, it's because paradox is inherently confusing. And both are equally true. I am not that, and I am that. And you're not going to say, but maybe just a little bit more of this one. It's like both, right? Koshas are just part of being in a form, being a human. When we are practicing yoga and we are representatives of kind of this internal system, there are plenty of people out there, and this is what I mean when I say in the Western world, we really do put our focus on the physical form, right? Where we'll be like, wow, that person's an amazing yogi because they're doing like a handstand and then they're dropping into a crow pose and then they're shooting it into chaturanga and then they're jumping back into crow pose and then lifting. What? That person is a perfect yogi. I mean, they're a perfect gymnast, right? That's not the same thing as being a perfect yogi. A yogi is equally concerned with all 5 of these layers, right? If you are operating with a constricted heart and you're unable to feel joy, isn't that a problem? If you are judgmental, if you are, if you don't even pay attention to your inner voice and you just make rash decisions and you don't really care about your values, right? Then that is just as important a layer to cultivate. Essentially, this model is reminding us Clean it all up. Don't just clean up the physical body, clean it all up. Clean up your breath, clean up the movement of the energy within you, clean up your mind, clean up your intuitive listening and that inner voice and your belief systems. And you know what? Being with yourself, being with your deepest heart, clean that up too, right? So maybe you've never done a handstand in your life, but you are deeply connected to your heart. You're deeply connected to your intuitive self. You're deeply connected to communicating with people. And then you just happen to, go for a walk once in a while and breathe into your body. That's closer to a true yogi than scrolling through Instagram and judging a good yogi based on a photograph, right? Much closer to just have an awareness from that inner core back outward than what we tend to do, which is just look at the outward and then make assumptions based on what's inside. And aren't those assumptions really problematic? you know? Bring yourself into your body. Let's give ourselves a moment to check in. Just a light, energetic toning. Make sure you relax fully on the inhalation. And take one more. Relax. Open your eyes.